and I have formed you up into 5 groups of mostly 4. 2 groups have 5 people in them just because we have a difficult number to divide here. I really tried to give people their preferences, but for the first time ever, I wasn't able to give everyone their first or second choice, in part because Oedipus and Don Quixote proved to be way more popular than anything else, and the Tale of Genji way less popular than anything else. So for those of you who did not get your choice, I'm really, really sorry. I tried, but remember, this was a totally blind process, right? When I was forming up the groups, I didn't know who I was assigning to what. Okay, so Oedipus group is going to be Sarah Arnold, she sits right there. She's here but is not back yet. Stephanie Welch. So just, take note of each other so that you can recognize one another. Mion Little. Taryn Burns, and Reagan Ringley. So everybody who was in that group, just please raise your hands so that everybody else, if you don't know each other this way, okay, now you recognize one another, right? So after class, it would be a good idea to get together with your group members, exchange contact information, and start setting up meetings, right? Okay, so working on the Ramayana is going to be Savannah Ross, Savannah Conger, Frank Wilson, who's the guy who sits right there, he's not here today, and Corinne Childers. Working on the Song of Roland will be Jenna Thompson, Jalen Stiles, Brittany Carswell, and Ashley Smith. Tale of Genji will be Jamie Waters, Devin Wimberly, Deontay Hill, who's the guy with the goatee who usually sits right here, is also not here today, and Megan Grimes. And on Don Quixote, we have Tanisha Hall, Taylor Fisher, Secret Wingard, Erica Hines, and James Harden. Okay, so those are your groups. This is posted to Georgia View, so you should be able to find this if you happen to forget who you're supposed to be working with. Right, the assignment is there, the assignment's posted. One thing I will say, if you try to look at this in the Georgia View viewer, this is going to get all jumbled up, so download it as a Word document in order to actually see it properly. All right, so what you're going to do, right, you're going to research, write, and deliver as a group a 20-minute presentation on a single literary text, right, your assigned text. Now, when I say 20 minutes, right, I really, really want you to hold to 20 minutes. The last couple of semesters, this has been a little bit of a problem. Not that people have been going too short, but that people have been going way too long. So you need to be selective about the material that you present, right? Make sure you are presenting for your portion of the presentation only what you think is most important, right? Got to keep it tight, keep it to 20 minutes. So for these two groups of 5, that means each of you should be talking for about 4 minutes. Groups of 4, each of you should be talking for about 5 minutes. So what I want from you in your presentation, right? I want a brief summary of the text in question, right? Give us a brief rundown of the plot. I want you to provide a bit of historical and cultural context for us, right? If this is, say, an ancient Greek text, right, tell us about how this fits into an ancient Greek historical context, an ancient Greek cultural context. I want a brief literature review detailing the most important things other scholars have written about this text, right? So you're going to have to do some research for this. I want you to do a literary analysis of the text, right? So I want you to actually pick apart the language and imagery in the text. You're going to provide a bibliography, right? I just need one bibliography for the whole group. I don't need an individual bibliography from everyone. And finally, I do want you each to provide a brief write-up detailing and rating each group member's contribution. And this will be during the final exam period, right? So our final exam would have been on Friday, the 2nd of December. So we're going to meet here from 10:30 to 12:30, and this is what we're going to do instead, right? And because we only have this 2-hour window to operate in, and I'm sure many of you have other exams, right? This is one of the reasons we have to try to keep the presentations tight. You have to try to keep it to 20 minutes because we have this limited time frame in which to work. All right, so as far as the write-up I want from you is concerned. So you're going to write a short paragraph telling me what each member of the group did, including yourself, right? What parts of the presentation were you directly responsible for? What parts of the presentation were other people directly responsible for? This allows me to figure out who did what when I'm assigning a grade, right? And you'll each be graded individually, right? I'm not giving a grade to the whole group. I'm giving a grade to each of you individually. So this allows me to figure out, based on everybody's accounts, who's pulling their weight in the group and who isn't. I want you to rate from 1 to 5 each member of your group, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest, the following 3 dimensions, right? First, responsiveness. When you tried to contact this person, did he or she respond? Right? If you emailed, you called, you sent a text, right? Did they get back to you quickly? Did they show up for meetings on time and ready to work? Second dimension here is collegiality, right? How pleasant was this person to work with? If they disagreed with people, did they do so in a respectful fashion? Right? Did they try to force their opinions on everybody else? Third, I want to know about each person's intellectual contribution. Right? Did this person actually contribute ideas? Right? Did they shape the intellectual content of the presentation, or did they just do what other people told them to do? Right? So, in addition to your presentation, what your fellow group members have to say about your contribution will also shape the grade, right? Now, as far as what I want from the presentations, what these should look like, think about the most boring classes you have to take, right? The ones that are hardest to sit through. What do they usually look like? PowerPoint, right? Friggin' PowerPoint. There are actually studies that have shown that PowerPoint makes people dumber. Right? So you can use PowerPoint, you can use Prezi, you can use things like that if you absolutely need to. But I would suggest to you that you do it sparingly, right? Don't try to cram your whole presentation onto a couple of slides and just stand there and read off of the slides, right? Try to engage your audience. Think about the classes you most enjoy going to, the teachers you feel like you learn the most from, and try to mimic the sorts of things they do, right? Try to imitate the sorts of things they do. If they, use games to reinforce ideas, go ahead, do that, right? I've had students do presentations before where they start with a little game of hangman or something. Now, don't go too gimmicky, because that'll take too much time out of the content of the presentation, but do things that you think will engage other students, right? And in a lot of ways, you guys know best what engages you and what doesn't. So think about the kind of presentation you would want to you would actually want to see as you're putting one together, right? So yeah, I would suggest if you use PowerPoint or Prezi, just use them as visual aids, right? Use them for showing pictures. That's really what they're designed for. That's really what they're best for. All right, so other points here. I know that the easiest way to put together a presentation is to give each person a separate role and then go split up and do those separate things and then just come back when it's time to give the presentation. But in most cases, when people do that, you kind of end up with a shitty presentation, right? The parts don't work together. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So I would suggest you, one, that you meet often and you keep up with what other people in your group are doing. This is one of the reasons why I'm giving you this assignment relatively early, right? So that you have plenty of time to get started, so that you have plenty of time to, have these meetings to hash these issues out. I would also suggest that instead of giving each person a single part to do, you share responsibility for various parts. And here's why, right? If we look at some of the things I want you to do, some of the assigned roles here, some of them are way easier than others, right? Providing a summary is going to be a hell of a lot easier than providing the historical and cultural context, right? So share those responsibilities equally among the group, right? Don't let one person grab all the easy tasks while giving the difficult stuff to others, right? Do things together, work on things together, do research together. And it's a good idea if you get together and rehearse the presentation more than once before you come and deliver it, right? One, this lets you know whether or not you're going under or over time, right? Do we have enough material yet? And two, right, if you practice a couple of times beforehand, by the time you get up here and give the presentation, your group is a well-oiled machine, right? You know what you're doing. Everybody knows when they're supposed to come in, what they're supposed to say, and everything's great. It's also good if you're actually able to bounce off of each other rather than just sort of speaking separately. Finally, I do want to say take the research portion of this seriously. Right? I do expect you to do some serious scholarly research. I expect each person in the group to have read the text that you're talking about, please. And the sources you use should be similar to the kinds of sources you're using in your final papers. So this means no online sources, no summaries, no popular newspapers or magazines. Scholarly reference works, journals, and books. That's what you should be using for this. Okay, so does anybody have any questions about the assignment?
Can we use note cards when we're giving the presentation?
Yeah, you can use note cards when you're giving the presentation, right? But again, you will do better if you're not completely reliant on the note cards, right? So you can use the note cards to keep yourself moving along, to jog your memory, but if you're just standing here reading note cards, the Shahnameh was written in the 11th century by the poet Abul Qasim Ferdowsi, right? Everybody's going to fall asleep. So yeah, use the note cards for reference if you want, but don't just read off of them. Yeah, you can certainly have something up here for reference though. Yeah, Reagan.
You might have already answered this, but when you say no online sources, do you mean like not Wikipedia, you can use anything on Galileo?
Yeah, things that, yeah,
Straight up, like
exactly.
nothing online.
Yeah, things that you find on Galileo are fine. Things that you find through the library are fine. What I'm talking about by and large here are the same kinds of like kind of bullshit sources that we talked about last time. So yeah, don't use Wikipedia, don't use SparkNotes, don't use shmoop.com, right? Don't use the same sorts of things that I don't want you using on your paper, I don't want you using for this presentation, which is why I didn't spell that out in too much detail here. Other questions? No? Everything's clear? All right, so when we adjourn today, it would behoove you to get together with the rest of your group and at the very least exchange information, right? You should probably start working on this as early as possible, right? If you start working on this early, then it will not, crush you at the end of the term. Do you have I see a question forming, Devin?
Yes, sir. Like if we were to use like Prezi or PowerPoint, would we be allowed to use like pictures to like show you like what is actually going on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You can certainly use it, yeah, like as a kind of visual aid, right? What I'm suggesting, and I'm not saying you can't, I'm not banning its use completely, right? What I am saying is that you shouldn't rely on it to provide all the information for your presentation, right? Don't use it the way probably some of your teachers in the sciences do. Yeah, Stephanie.
So like, if we do like make a PowerPoint of
Mhm.
pictures like to go along with our
Yeah.
presentation, do we need to cite the pictures on bibliography?
I wouldn't
Or are
worry.
you not worried about
I
it?
wouldn't worry too much about that. I mean, there might be rights issues, but yeah, I think this is what would be considered fair use under copyright laws. Yeah, don't worry about citing the pictures. Anything else? Yes, Ashley.
This is probably super early to ask this. How formal was the presentation?
You mean as in like how do you have to dress?
Yeah, because I mean, I'm just wondering because I'm
Yeah.
used to like accounting presentations and
Sure.
that's just like no joke. So,
Sure. And yeah, I mean, how do I dress to come to work?
well, I mean, you're not a joke, but I mean.
No,
like,
no, I know, but no, this is like it's casual, right? I don't really care about how you're dressed. That doesn't factor in for me. So yeah, wear what you want, wear what's comfortable. If you want to wear togas, go for it. Yeah, secret.
Is there a certain limit to creativity when it comes down to presentation?
I've had students do all sorts of things with this in the past, right? I've had students do little skits. I've had students invent little games, with quizzes and whatnot to keep the rest of the audience engaged. Honestly, like, as long as you're sticking within the time limit and you're hitting all of the points you need to hit, yeah, go out on a limb. Be creative, be interesting. Yeah, Jamie.
Piggybacking off that,
Uh-huh.
Does creativity like help our grade?
Well, that's a loaded question, isn't it? I would say yes. Originality and creativity will help your grade, again, as long as you are providing the information that must be provided, right? As long as you're getting all of the things done the presentation is supposed to do. Be as creative as you want. And yes, a creative presentation will probably get a better grade than a dry presentation that also hits all the points, right? Anything else? No? We're good? All right, so like I said, this is posted to Georgia View. You can look at it anytime you want. And if you have further questions, all right, come talk to me or email me. All right, so the music that I was playing for you as you came into class today is a goofy little 10-minute epic by the British heavy metal band Iron Maiden about the life and accomplishments of Alexander the Great, right? Who we experience in this text as Sikandar. Now, I chose this particular piece of music for today in part because it amuses me, and it sort of takes me back to my boneheaded, pimply 8th grade self. But I think it also has a lot to tell us about the way we tend to construct and consume history, right? One of the things that makes this song dumb, I'm sorry, my 8th grade idols, one of the things that makes this song kind of dumb is that the lyrics are just a laundry list of things that Alexander did, right? He was born in Macedonia, and he went and he conquered India, right? And he conquered it, like just battle after battle after battle, city after city after city. It's just a list of events, right? Events and dates that are constructed around this single transformative figure, right? And this is the way I learned history in school, and it's probably the way some of you learned history in school too, right? Do they still teach history this way? I mean, it's like you sit and memorize lists of dates, and you have to reproduce, I mean, no, I'm not. Do they teach history with Iron Maiden songs? God, I hope they don't.
I want to go to school where you went to school, and that's how they teach.
It's not. But yeah, it's like you memorize this list of dates. You memorize the names of these important figures who shaped the world we live in now, right? This idea, it's called the great man theory of history, right? It came to prominence in the 19th century, and it focuses on the deeds of mostly male, mostly white people who did incredible things, right? That made the world that we live in now. And Alexander is usually one of these figures. There's a guy by the name of Hayden White. He's a historian. Maybe was a historian. He may very well be dead now. I don't know. He wrote a book called Metahistory. And White's argument in Metahistory is that the historian actually works with the same tools as the poet or the novelist. Right? That really, any history we try to write is in various ways a fiction. Because you have to do the same sorts of things a writer of fiction does, right? You have to choose a focal character. Right? So if you're writing history from the perspective of Alexander the Great, right, it's going to look very different than if you're writing history from the perspective of, say, Darius of Persia, the king he defeated. It's going to look very different than it would if you were writing from the perspective of someone who was in Alexander's armies, right? Whether one of his generals or one of his foot soldiers. So you're making all these choices about whose history you're going to represent simply by choosing your focal point, your focal character. Right? We're going to see it through this person's eyes. You're also required to select some events and some personalities and omit others. Right? Things that don't fit your version of the historical narrative, you tend to leave out. You construct the narrative by selecting which events make it in. Now, what we have in the Shahnameh is a kind of meta-history of Iran from a prehistoric mythological age up to the Arab conquest of Persia in the year 633. And this is written through the eyes largely of fictionalized versions of heroes and kings. Right, so it's written in three sort of stages. There are three parts to it. The first part deals with the mythological age. So we get the creation of the world. What do we call a myth that describes the creation of the world? Yes, very good, a cosmogony. And we get descriptions of the deeds of prehistoric kings. In particular, the family of a king named Ferdowsi, who was, according to the text, at one time ruler of most of the world, right? Ferdowsi has 3 sons, and he divides the world amongst them, right? To his eldest son, Solon, he gives Rome. To his middle son, Tur, he gives Central Asia. And to his youngest son, Iraj, he gives the jewel in his empire, the great prize in his empire, Persia.
What's that second one? Tar?
Tur, T-U-R. Tur is supposed to be the ancestor of modern Turks in Iranian mythology. So Salm and Tur decide that they're not satisfied with their lots, and they murder their brother Iraj, who is then avenged by his son Manacher. And Manacher inaugurates the heroic age, which goes from his reign, Manuchehr, to Alexander's conquest of Persia. So the portion of the Shahnameh that you read for today comes at the end of the second part of the epic. And this portion includes the conversion of the Persians to the Zoroastrian religion, which informs this text to a fairly great degree, despite the fact that it's written after most of Persia, most of Iran has been converted to Islam. And the third portion, the historic age, which goes from beginning of the Sassanid Empire, right, which we talked a little bit about last time, up to the Arab conquest. So the text of the epic, which is written in the 11th century, takes us from the beginnings of the world as envisioned in Iranian mythology up to the defeat of the Persian Empire by the new upstart religion of Islam and its adherents, right? The Arab conquest of Persia took place in 633, and at that time, Islam as a religion was less than a quarter of a century old, right? Muhammad didn't start having revelations until about the year 610. So, what is it that motivates this poet to construct this lengthy history, this lengthy imaginative history of his homeland at the time that he does? The poet's name is Abolkasem Ferdowsi. And Ferdowsi was born into the minor nobility and was patronized by the Arab rulers of Persia at the end of the 10th, beginning of the 11th century. Now, when we think back to the political situation that Muhammad was born into, right? When he's born in Mecca around the year 570, who were the big powers in the region? Think back to last time. Which empires would the Arabian Peninsula have been sandwiched between? Yeah, the Byzantine Empire, right? And what was was the Byzantine Empire? What was it sort of the last remains of? Yeah, the Byzantine Empire was the eastern half of the Roman Empire. So it's basically all that was left of the Roman world. And the Sassanid Empire was where was that? Where was it? Pardon? Yeah, this is Persia, modern day Iran and Iraq, right? So these two had so weakened each other from centuries of conflict that it was fairly easy for armies from the Arabian Peninsula to come sweep in and take out the Sassanid Empire. And this began a centuries-long repression of not only Persia's traditional religion, right? Zoroastrianism by the way, is a very, very ancient religion. It's one of the most ancient religions that is still practiced today. It dates from about the 10th century BCE, right? So it's been around a very, very, very long time. How many of you are familiar with the rock band Queen? Okay, a good number of you, right? Freddie Mercury, the group's lead singer, was raised a Zoroastrian. His real name, he's of Persian descent. His real name was Farouk Balsari. Right? Nobody thought Freddie Mercury was anyone's real name, right? No one's born with that name. Yeah, so Zoroastrianism, very, very ancient religion, and along with other Persian artistic traditions, it's initially suppressed. Right? Much of Persian culture is initially suppressed. Though later Arab rulers become admirers of Persian culture. Right? Persia, for example, has a long tradition of what's called miniatures painting. Have you ever seen, like in some Middle Eastern texts, you see these kind of brightly painted pictures with these kind of still figures. Sometimes they're fighting, sometimes they're praying. Usually surrounded by calligraphy. That's a Persian tradition, not an Arabic tradition. Because what do we remember about the representation of the human form in art, according to Islam? If we think back to last time, what is, for a devout Muslim, the representation of the human form? Why is that sinful? Yeah, you're getting it. Yeah, you're getting it. Right? Essentially, yeah, it's Islam takes a very, very hard line against idolatry, right? And they interpret idolatry very, very broadly. So if God created man in His image, then to create an image of a person is itself idolatry. So a lot of these old Persian artistic traditions get kind of swept under the rug for a while. But then, yeah, these 10th and 11th century Arab rulers who have come to admire this culture, have become immersed in it, are willing to sort of let it come to the fore again. And Ferdowsi is writing at a time of increased Persian nationalism within the Islamic Caliphate, right? Even, those converted Muslims who live in Iran are rediscovering Persian culture. There's a new interest in Persian culture and in Persian history. Now, what most Persian historians of Ferdowsi's time tried to do was harmonize all of this historical and mythological material with Islam. Right? So that was their principle for selecting or omitting material and for choosing historical perspective characters, right? Okay, we're going to try to harmonize our native traditions with the religion we follow now, and with the religion that our rulers tell us we kind of have to keep in line with. Ferdowsi is unusual in that he allows a much stronger influence, a much stronger Zoroastrian influence to creep into his work. He doesn't really try to harmonize his work with either Islam or Zoroastrianism, but he doesn't try to suppress either of them either. Now, we talked a little bit about Zoroastrianism last time. Do you remember anything about it? Or, some of you, somebody in the class actually knew something about it. And he's not here. Yeah.
I do remember one thing. Didn't you say it was the oldest monotheistic religion?
Wasn't it dualistic religion?
Yeah, it's dualistic. It's very, very ancient. I think it might be the oldest monotheistic religion that's still practiced.
Wasn't it like the good and evil gods?
Yeah, you have a good god called Ormazd, and Ormazd represents the principle of Asha, or divine order. And he is locked in constant struggle with an evil spirit who is called sometimes Ahriman, sometimes Angramaynu. And Angramaynu represents a principle called Druj, or chaos.
Okay, the second one.
Uh-huh.
Spell that again. The first one, not the Azraman.
Ahriman. And then the other name for the same spirit is Angraminyu. And so these two are locked in a constant struggle, not so much over human souls as really just sort of for control of creation, right? Angramaynu's servants are called Div, or demons. And demons are actively destructive in the physical world in Zoroastrianism. Right. They're not so much the way they're represented in the Abrahamic religions, not the way they're represented in Christianity or Judaism or Islam as tempters who lead people astray. They're represented as actual physical beings in the world that run around wrecking things and killing people. Now, Ormazd, on the other hand, is served by a collection of sort of angelic spirits called Amishaspentas. Now, one thing to note here is that the Persians were very closely related to the people who became Hindus in India, right? Same ethnic group initially. They're both descended from the Central Asian tribe called the Aryans. And so the Amishaspentas look very much like the very ancient Hindu gods of the Vedas that we talked about. Now, how does this play out in the story of Sikander, right? In a Persian nationalist imaginative history? Well, first, one of the claims that Persian nationalists tended to make about their empire was that it had never been conquered by an outsider. This is, as we see, completely historically false, right? We know, one, that it was conquered by Alexander the Great, a Greek, in the 4th century BC, and even a few centuries prior to Ferdowsi's writing, there had been the Arab conquest, right? So how does Ferdowsi rewrite the history of Alexander's conquest in order to fit a Persian nationalist narrative.
He makes his father or he was like, his mother was exiled from Persia.
Yeah, he rewrites the narrative, right? He makes Alexander a Persian. He doesn't know he's a Persian. He's raised in Greece. But he is the actual eldest son of the Persian king Darab, right? If you look on page 963, right, the very beginning of this portion of text that we have. One night, this lovely moon, arrayed in jewels and scents, lay sleeping beside the king. Suddenly she sighed deeply, and the king turned his head away, offended by the smell of her breath. This bad odor sickened him. We okay? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. This bad odor sickened him, and he frowned, wondering what could be done about it. He sent knowledgeable doctors to her. One who was especially expert was able to find a remedy. There is an herb that burns the palate, which they call Sikander in Greece, and he rubbed this against the roof of her mouth. She wept a few tears, and her face turned as red as brocade because it burned her mouth, but the ugly smell was gone. But although this beautiful woman's breath was now as sweet as musk, the king no longer felt any love for her. His heart had grown cold towards his bride, and he sent her back to Philquis. The princess grieved because she was pregnant, but she told no one of this. So she returns to Greece, carrying the Persian king's child, whom she's going to name after this herb that corrected her fault, right? This herb that burned the bad breath out of her palate. So in what way is Sikander, at least initially in this narrative, a sort of correction? In what way is this name symbolic?
I feel like he offers help that doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not even so much that he goes around and offers people help, right? He shows up outside of their capital cities, demands tribute from them, and threatens to burn their cities down if they don't give in, right?
So he sees fault initially where there is none, similar to the way that her bad breath was not necessarily a fault, it was just simply a part of her.
Well, if we look at his first conquest, right? What's the first conquest that he achieves here?
Dara.
Yeah, Dara in Persia. And who's Dara? Yeah, his younger half-brother, right? Dara, had Sikander's mother stayed in Persia, would not have been king, right? So Sikander, as the elder son, is actually the rightful king of Persia. So we see this is actually a really clever and creative way to rewrite this history of conquest, right? We were not conquered by a foreign power when Alexander the Great came through, because he was really a Persian and was the rightful king anyway, as the elder brother. So here we go, Persian nationalist problem solved. We can keep our historical narrative intact. Yay! Now, how is Sikander different in this battle against Dara than he is in his subsequent conflicts?
He grieves for him.
Yeah, he grieves for Dara when he dies. Is he responsible for Dara's death?
No.
Certainly not directly, right? Dara's murdered by two of his own counselors, by two of his own servants. Right? Dara's counselors, page 964, made their way to Sikandar and said, "Wise and victorious Lord, we have killed your enemy. His days as king are over." When Sikandar heard Janushar's words, he said to him and to Mayar, "Where is this enemy of mine whom you've cast aside this way? Take me to him." The two led Sikandar, whose heart was bursting with rage, to where Dara lay with his chest covered in gore and his face as pale as fenugreek. Sikandar gave orders that no one else should approach and that Dara's two counselors be detained. Quick as the wind, he dismounted and laid the wounded man's head on his thigh. He rubbed both his hands against Dara's face until he began to revive and speak. Then Sikandar removed the royal diadem from Dara's head and loosened his armor. No doctor was nearby, and when he saw Dara's wounds, a few tears dropped from Sikandar's eyes. Now, just to pause here briefly, according to medieval Persian legal and ethical codes, there are essentially five elements that make up a justification for war. Let's make some room here. All right. So, first, is kerad, which means reason. It is unethical to go to war against someone else without cause, right? And there are two causes that are regarded as appropriate. If you're fighting to defend your own country or defend your own rights, that's acceptable. If you're fighting to correct someone else's faults, that's also acceptable. So defensive and corrective wars are considered sort of sufficient reason for fighting. Condition number 2, ra'i, or moral expedience. Right. Is this actually the best and most efficacious way to achieve the correct moral ends? Number 3, darang, or prudence, right? Basically, don't ride off half-cocked. Plan it out first. Number 4, dad, or justice. This is about fair dealing with your enemies. Right? And 5, mer, or kindness. Right? When you've defeated an enemy, how do you treat them? Right? Do you take them prisoner? Do you enslave them? Do you kill every last man of them? Right? Or do you show mercy? And an ethical warrior, an ethical general in the Persian tradition shows mercy to a defeated enemy. So, to continue on 964 here. May this pass easily from you, he said, and may the hearts of those who wish you ill tremble in terror. Get up and let me lay you in a golden litter, or if you have the strength, sit yourself in the saddle. I will bring doctors from India and Greece, and I shall weep tears of blood for your pain. I shall restore your kingdom to you, and when you have recovered, we shall swear friendship. This instant I shall hang from a gibbet those who have injured you. When I heard last night what had happened, my heart filled with sorrow, my soul with anger. We are from the same stock, the same root, the same people. Why should we destroy one another for ambition's sake? So on the one hand here, Sikandar shows disapproval of the treachery of Dara's ministers, right? This isn't the way he wanted to win this war. This isn't the way to ethically win a war. Through trickery, through treachery, through betrayal. What else is he demonstrating here? Which of these principles do we find demonstrated in his war against Dara generally? Is this a war with sufficient reason? Does he have a reason to go to war with Dara? If we think about this, he's not defending anything, right? He's not defending Greece, but is he correcting a mistake in the line of succession? Yeah, this is a corrective war. He's fixing a mistake. We don't have enough information to determine whether this is or is not morally expedient, right? Or whether or not he's planned, whether or not this is prudent. But there is here a concern with justice, right? With fair dealing. The traitors are punished. The people who win the war for Sikandar unfairly are punished. And how is he treating his defeated enemy?
With mercy.
Yeah, mercy and kindness, right? It's like, I'll get you doctors, I'll give you your throne back, right? We'll be friends from now on, everything will be great. And even after Dara has died, Sikandar will then incorporate Dara's soldiers into his own army and treat them as his own people. So at least in this initial confrontation, Sikandar seems to be, by and large, following the Persian rules of war. What about in his subsequent confrontations? As he goes around conquering other parts of the world, how well does he stick to these ideals?
He usually stays pretty merciful after killing the leader.
Yeah, he kills the leader and then, is reasonably kind to the surviving army, right? Like when he kills 4 in India, he shows mercy to the defeated Indians. But was there anything that struck you as weird about how he kills 4?
It was a fluke, really.
Yeah.
He turned around and then got decapitated.
It's a lucky shot, right? Yeah. 4 gets distracted for a moment and Sikandar cuts his head off.
It's the will of the gods.
Yeah,
God.
exactly. Right?